Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me okay. So in terms of what I wanted to discuss today, I think a lot of what we've discussed today can sometimes be a little bit abstract and theoretical until we start to do it. So what I wanted to do was give you the opportunity to see a bit of the operational context of Peppol. And to do that, I wanted to talk about the NHS background, NEP, and use some examples of what they've done and really look at what Peppol means in practice. So if we all look at the state of play in terms of the NHS, I've noticed on the attendance today some very old names that I'm very familiar with, but nice to see as well some very new names and some people who haven't yet considered a Peppol access point. So if we look at the state of play in the NHS, it was all very well-intentioned in the past, but very convoluted, multi-layered and complex. And in fairness, usually left to the suppliers to pick up the challenge and the duplication of working with different systems. So software suppliers would often gift or sell a solution to a hospital, and then there would be almost a forced encouragement to join that solution. Now, this may have worked out well in the beginning in starting to attract the larger multinationals, but it wasn't sustainable. Every trust had its own solution, its own KPIs, and even its own criteria for success. Each one of these would illustrate a tangible cost to the supplier of satisfying that requirement. And we've seen that in the NHS, be it across how to connect through EDI, how to manage a PIM or the national catalogue and the GDSN. So it's all been quite challenging. And what that meant was that everybody was chasing a different criteria of success. And the one criteria for success that really mattered was lost. And that one criteria is how many suppliers can participate and connect. Because really, the theme of what GS1 does and what everything we're about today is around connectivity and interoperability. And that is a key to success, not just for suppliers and for hospitals, but for patients in general. So if we look at the evolution of connectivity here in the UK, we can see what's happened over the years. So to start with, if I go back 15, 20 years, we were dealing with point-to-point systems. So this is where one supplier would link to a particular hospital. Very bespoke, very labour intensive, and just not scalable at all. If we go to the middle section, here you'll see that we moved to a few-to-few model with a single supplier who is a channel between hospitals and suppliers in the UK market. And generally, those solutions aren't cost prohibitive and really only benefit the larger suppliers. There's no critical mass, and that's what really we need. And for anyone who knows the NHS, there are a very big number of high-scale global manufacturers, but there's also an immensely long tail of smaller suppliers who are equally as important as helping the NHS meet their goals, whether it be a small wig supplier for cancer patients or the local bakery or butchers that supply food to the hospital. So there's a real big mix and not all of it is clinical. And then finally, with Peppol, it's what we would like to term as the many-to-many. Very similar to a mobile phone network. It works. So when you have a mobile phone, you don't need to worry about whether you're on O2 or Vodafone and whether you can only speak to other people on Vodafone or O2. You just need to worry that you want to make a call to somebody and it works. So effectively, what Peppol does is open up connectivity and benefits to all. And the nice thing about Peppol is we've talked today about a lot of things, and I know Mark wasn't able to give a figure in the Smith & Nephew case, but some of these are very expensive or robust implementations that take a lot of resource or capital. The nice thing about Peppol is that it doesn't need any of that. So for anybody who's on the call today who hasn't picked an access point, please do consider doing that, because actually for the main part, it's absolutely free. So it's not very often you can say there is something out there for nothing that gives you immense value back. But on this time, we can, so we should say that. So, what did this mean to UK healthcare, and why was the previous situation, in my opinion, so unhealthy? And the answer is, for me, it engendered the stick approach. A closed network, which is what the many-to-many is, existed and really only gave benefits to the hospital if the suppliers joined as well. Even if their suppliers had their own systems and their own way of doing something, they were almost forced to join. And that's just from a technology point of view. And I think we've talked a lot today about technology as the enabler. But what I would say the very most important thing about Peppol is it really does impact relationships between hospitals and suppliers. So Steve mentioned, and he came from the NHS as I did myself. So for those of you who don't know me, I was part of NHS PASA and then a director of the Northwest Collaborative Procurement Hub as was that later became SBS. And this is my very own personal opinion, but there were probably two types of distinct behaviours in the NHS. Firstly, partnership between suppliers and hospitals, looking at whole life costs, strategic partnerships, all of those kind of things. And then the second one, the adversarial relationships, where really the suppliers were sometimes seen as somebody that needed to be controlled and managed. And if I'm honest, the latter was probably in the past maybe more prevalent. And I'm ashamed to say that as a younger person, I probably put a foot in that camp as well. And why was that? And I would argue that there's a direct correlation between capability to do EDI and the relationships that suppliers and hospitals can have. And that's because systems data or lack of data breeds distrust. Disparity, old data, and inability to engage on a level playing field all disrupt the ability to have proper conversations and take decisions based on firm ground. And that's not healthy. If we have sales reps on the call today, you'll probably still have meetings with the NHS where before a meeting can start, you've been asked to provide spend data because the trust struggles to, or there will be historic arrangements or different frameworks where one part of the hospital may have paid or had a different service to another part of the hospital. And again, this just isn't healthy. It's not the fault of suppliers at all. Very often it's the fault of the hospital. But it means often that the relationships have been frozen on a very transactional basis. There's been little engagement outside clinical and procurement staff. And part of that reason is because the NHS has always been thinking about how do they get all suppliers connected so that they can start to get the value of that electronic connection. But they've never stopped chasing that connection. And so they've never matured and evolved to a point where they could actually start to use the data. So what I wanted to do was very briefly talk about NEP. And I would say NEP are the pioneers of Peppol in the UK. So for those of you who can remember when Peppol first came out, there were 6 Pathfinder trusts who started to look at the premise of Peppol. And they did the connectivity and they showed that it worked. But in fairness, many of the benefits were extrapolated and many didn't roll out mainstream and critical mass. And NEP have really taken the reins in terms of doing that. So they started in 2001. They're a consortia created by the NHS and for the NHS. And as I say, it's proved really innovative and been the pioneer, not just because it's adopted Peppol, but also because it's adopted GS1 standards throughout its whole infrastructure. And that means because it's a consortia and because it's done an enormous amount of testing across with us, with other access points, they've actually laid the ground rules for yourselves the hospitals across the entire NHS. And that's because Peppol works very differently to other old EDI connections. So once one access point has tested with another access point, that data can just flow. Which means, for example, when we've turned on one hospital, and we heard from Leeds this morning, who is a member of NEP, once Leeds has tested with Smith and Nephew, that means that every other hospital in that consortia can turn on Smith and Nephew immediately. And that's been really effective. What I'm really proud of NEP as well is that they've really approached the project with the carrot. I get incredibly frustrated when I see some emails or notes that go out to suppliers from the NHS that are very dictatorial or speak to the benefits of the hospital. And I think the one thing about Peppol has become very clear. It is a win-win situation for both hospital and supplier. So they've very much gone out with an educational background, and they've spoken with the suppliers and really been able to promote the benefits to both the supplier and the hospital, and actually use the process to really get to know the suppliers far better. And part of that is because they recognise the importance beyond transactional. So this isn't about the efficient use of purchase orders. It isn't about receiving accurate invoices per se. Obviously that helps and it creates efficiency. But what they really understand is that Peppol is the foundation and the bedrock of linking product to patient outcome, of understanding as a patient comes in the front door of a hospital and then leaves, what is the point of care cost all the way through that journey, and also recognizing that the patient can be kept more safe through the use of track and trace and Peppol. So where have we got to? When the Pathfinder's finished, I think there are around 20 suppliers that were active in the NHS. That has now extended to over 1,000 suppliers that are actively sending and receiving documentation every single day. There's full GS1 GLN compliance, which is really fantastic to see. Actually, there's now not 6 hospitals or NHS organisations engaged, but actually 280. So if any of you are on this call today and you're not sure which hospitals are available for you to connect to, feel free to reach out to me and we can provide that list. And what's really exciting, in the last few weeks, the first private hospital is engaged with Peppol, which again is fantastic because it shows that they're seeing the benefits that Peppol brings as well. So again, that's really, really good. Very, very quickly, I'll go through this. What I wanted to do was break out the internal and external benefits of Peppol for the hospital and for the wider community. I won't go into the internal efficiencies because I think Leeds did a fantastic job of that. But I do think it is worth noting that we've been through an enormous change. We're still in enormous change with COVID. And I wouldn't underestimate the agility that Peppol has been able to give both suppliers and the hospitals in terms of how they manage their workloads, especially since through much of the COVID times, a lot of the back office staff within the hospitals have been working remotely. The other thing is that the trusts have started to be able to work with other trusts through the same process. They've started to be able to digitize things like the nationwide services in the NHS, like NHS Fleet and lease cards. Really importantly, it's all about internal interoperability as well. So if we go back to the example of the mobile phones, I would suggest that Peppol and GS1 standards are a bit like the iPhone. And actually everything you can do outside of that is an app. So there's lots of stuff that the hospitals want to be able to do. Mark talked this morning around inventory management within Leeds. And obviously using Peppol, the inventory management solutions and the Peppol access points like us, we can talk to each other as well. So again, things like e-rostering for agency staff, it's been really effective. We've been able to link in estates and facilities management. So I know today most of the people on this call will be medical device manufacturers or suppliers, but actually this is extending way outside the medical device or pharmaceutical markets. And then finally, again, using the idea of the app, it's really interesting to see how Peppol is now extending out into the community. So things like community equipment services, home care. So one of the things that's been really exciting is that we've used GS1 standards within NEP to actually create a home care module for patients who want to order products from their own homes. And we've used the GLNs to identify where those products need to be delivered to. And it's just an add-on app to the Peppol infrastructure, just using some innovation. But it again means that there is full traceability of that out into the community. And then most importantly for me, it's how Peppol can change the relationships between hospitals and suppliers. There's a real change in attitudes. There's real collaboration and innovation. So I, as a Peppol access point, spend very little of my day wondering whether the order or the invoice are arriving. That's an automated process. What I'm doing now is sitting down with suppliers and hospitals and actually starting to fix some of the age-old problems of healthcare that we never got to in the past because we were always waiting to do the next EDI or trying to align on standards that the hospital and supplier would use. All that's taken care of now. So we use a lot of time looking at facilitated joint workshops, solving the age-old problems of consignment stock, loan kits, all those kind of good things that have been around for ages and never got solved. So it's actually a really nice time to be around. And then again, the final point I would make is that data is able to drive new partnerships. I'm seeing a change in behavior in how hospitals commission products and services, more commitment contracts, more strategic partnerships when they can see the data and it's their data that they're working on, not having to rely on supplier data. So that's a very, very quick pitted history. I've kept it very high level. If anybody wants to come back to me, then feel free, but I'll open up to questions with George.
Thank you very much, Steve and Anna. It's very clear that there are increasing levels of Peppol standards adoption internationally, which is driving business efficiencies. And from Anna, it's clear that there are the benefits of GS1 and Peppol standards adoption, particularly with NEP and their related organisations. So great to hear. Chris, do we have some questions for Steve and Anna?
We do, but I'm conscious of the time. We are running close to our schedule. But there is one question here, and I think it's worth asking so you can reiterate this. As suppliers, we are constantly asked to sign up to bespoke portals by hospitals, which includes retrieval of purchase orders and submittal of invoices. Will this cease in the near future with the view that the Peppol concept is adopted by hospitals and trusts across the board?
Yes, in answer to the question being very quick, the whole point of Peppol is that all those portals melt away. So imagine Peppol is a front door. You pick your front door and that determines how those requests come in. So if you have a Peppol access point, all the various portals that you're asked to join, I can't think of them off the top of my head, but the trade shifts, etc., they all melt away. And you just have the one Peppol access point who will be responsible for picking up your data from the entire NHS and sending back your data to the entire NHS.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve and Anna. There is one further question I'd just like to, before we go on to the break, just answer, and that is it mandatory? Is Peppol mandatory to sell to the NHS? Now, the NHS e-procurement strategy stated that that all suppliers must adopt GS1 and PEPPOL standards. So for you to be compliant to that e-procurement strategy, the answer is yes. That is a straightforward answer.